Hello. So now we're going to go over the veins in the system using the flat man. But instead of starting up at the heart, first I wanted to draw your attention to this middle part. See, here's the diaphragm right here. So your heart's up here. Here's the diaphragm. Here's your descending aorta. It splits off right at the waist area. And here is like the hip, the inguinal area right here. So this is in your upper abdomen. And as you can see, this big brown section, that's your liver. These little kidney bean looking things are your kidneys. And this purple one sitting on top of your left kidney is your spleen. Now, I want to draw your attention to there's some extra vessels down here right in this area that we're not going to take account for. There's the red ones, which are your arteries, and there's the blue ones, which are your veins. But what are these purple ones doing here? These purple ones are neither part of your veins or arteries. This is part of the hepatic portal system. And what it does is it connects to all the different digestive organs that are down here in this area. And it runs a direct line of stuff from the stomach, stuff from the kidneys, stuff from the spleen, and it runs it directly up to the liver so the liver can process it without having it go into the bloodstream all the way around up the veins and into the brain and into the heart and all of that. So, and we can get to that more. I have a handout for this explaining the layout of the hepatic portal system, and I'm sure your teacher will cover it. So I just wanted to point out first that these purple ones are not part of what we're studying right now in this video. They're not part of your arteries, they're not part of your veins. Consider this a separate thing, entity. So the purple, that's why I wanted to use this model, because I wanted you to see the hepatic portal system and how it runs along, kind of like the arteries and veins, but what it does is it connects directly the organs here directly to the liver instead of having them empty out in a vein and go all over your system before it gets back to your liver. So your liver can clean the stuff out, the toxins out and everything. So ignore the purple veins, or ignore the purple vessels here, and we're going to just start with your inferior vena cava. Your inferior vena cava, just like your aorta, comes down through the diaphragm, and it goes all the way down right next to your aorta. They're like brother and sister. So this is the inferior vena cava, and it goes all the way down to your waist area. I bet you didn't know the inferior vena cava was that long, huh? You thought it was just up here by the heart. No, it comes through the diaphragm and goes all the way down your abdominal area, your abdominal region. Now, off of the inferior vena cava, you have your hepatic veins, and you have your veins that run over to the kidneys. So those will be renal. So anytime you hear the word kidney, think renal, because that's what that means. So here's the blue vein that runs over to the kidneys. You can come down here and you can see that it splits just like the aorta splits into the common iliacs, the left and right common iliacs. The inferior vena cava does the exact same thing. It splits into a left common iliac vein and a right common iliac vein. And the common iliac vein splits into two different iliac veins. There's the internal and here's the external. And over here is the exact same thing. Here's the common iliac vein, here's the internal iliac, here's the external iliac. Now these run down through the hip, and this does not end in your body. It's just cut off for the model so you can see the other stuff. You can see the artery and everything, that it doesn't cover it up. But this keeps going in real life. And you see how, let me move this camera. You see how this uh, external iliac, it kind of veers off, it splits, and there's this big fat one running down your leg. As soon as, here's the inguinal area, here's where it gets to the inguinal area. So it stops being the external iliac and it turns into other stuff. Now, this splits into two. This is going to be your femoral vein. Just like you have your femoral artery down here, your femoral artery is cut off right here just so you can see the bones and stuff underneath on the model. But it picks back up right here and it runs down the course of your leg. See, that's the femoral artery. Well, the femoral vein does the exact same thing. It's cut off right here after the external iliac. It's cut off so you can see underneath it, but then it picks back up right here. So in real life, this would be connected. This wouldn't be actually cut off. So this coming down here is your femoral vein, and then it goes behind the leg and behind the knee to your popliteal area, just like the artery does. So it's covered though, you can't see it. Now, so what in the world is this extra vein doing? And you're right, this is an extra vein that we don't have an artery for. This is the great saphenous vein, and it runs all the way down, and it makes a loop-de-loop and comes back up, and this is your saphenous vein. This is your lesser saphenous vein. So this really isn't too much important, but the great saphenous vein is. Now, if you ever know anybody, if you know your family or a family member or somebody you know had to have heart surgery and they had to put in another vein into the heart, this is the vein that they use. They'll cut some of this vein off and they'll use that and transplant it up to the heart so the heart has a proper working vein. The great saphenous vein is what they use for that. So interesting. Now let's go on up here to your heart. And as you can see, here's the inferior vena cava going through the diagram. Here's the bottom of the inferior vena cava. It goes up behind the heart and dumps into the right atrium of the heart. Here is your superior vena cava. Now, all of these going out to the side right here, these are your pulmonary arteries. Remember, the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins are the only ones that the colors are swapped. The blue ones are your pulmonary arteries, and the red ones are your pulmonary veins. Why is that? Because the blue pulmonary arteries always away. If it's carrying blood away from the heart, it's called an artery. That's the definition of an artery. Well, these blue arteries are the pulmonary arteries are carrying blood away from the heart into the lungs where it gets oxygenated, and the new oxygenated blood, which means the blood's turned red when it gets oxygenated, it comes back toward the heart within these red vessels. So those red vessels would be the pulmonary veins, because the veins go toward the heart. Arteries always away, veins go toward the heart. So these pulmonary arteries and veins are the blue ones are the arteries and the red ones are the veins. I hope that makes sense. But that's just for this little section right here. And of course the other side, this little section right here. Everything else, the arteries are red and the veins are blue. So here's the heart, and here is the pulmonary valve where the right ventricle squeezes, and it squeezes the blood, the used blood, up the pulmonary valve. See these little triangular things that make a circle? That's the valve. And then it goes up the pulmonary trunk and out in the pulmonary arteries, and then the blood returns in the pulmonary veins and then goes up into the aorta and out. And then it turns into the and it goes into the arteries. Now here's the inferior vena or superior vena cava. That's going to dump the used blood into the right atrium right here. And The difference between the arteries and veins up here is that, remember, the artery had this one brachiocephalic trunk on the right side of the patient, but it didn't have a brachiocephalic trunk on the left side. It just went common carotid artery, subclavian artery. But over here, the brachiocephalic trunk came first, and then it went common carotid, subclavian. Well, the veins have a brachiocephalic trunk on both sides. So here's your brachiocephalic trunk. It's just a little short, fat trunk before it divides into the jugular vein. Now, instead of the carotid vein, this is the common carotid artery, right? So we have the carotid artery, but the jugular vein. So these names are different. They're matched. They're each other's match, but the names are different. Here's the jugular vein. Common carotid artery, jugular vein. And also off of the brachiocephalic trunk is the subclavian vein, which you already knew the name of that because here's the subclavian artery. Now when it gets to under the armpit right here, it turns into the axillary vein, just like the artery does turn into the axillary artery. But then it comes down and the names change again, because right here, instead of, here's the brachial artery. Instead of brachial, this is basilic. And it's spelled like basil, like the herb you put in food, B-A-S-I-L, and then an I-C at the end of it, basilic. Here's the basilic vein, and over here is the cephalic vein. And why is it called the cephalic vein? Because cephalic means head, and this vein carries blood all the way up to your head. Almost. It carries it up to your shoulder, and then it goes into the brachiocephalic trunk and into the inferior vena cava. So this is the cephalic vein, and then it splits at the elbow, just like your artery does. This is the median cubital vein, and this is where I think this is like right around the area where you get your blood drawn. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's if they use a vein, then they would use the median cubital. If they're using an artery, then they would use this little diagonal doodad that comes down. And your basilic goes all the way down, and your cephalic kind of ends here, and it goes down, and then it loop-de-loops in the hand. So really, you just have to remember different names for the veins here in the arms. Here's the brachial artery next to the basilic vein. And then there's an extra vein on this side where there's not a big major artery. And this is the cephalic vein. Now, as we go down here into the abdomen, I told you to ignore the purple ones. But here's the inferior vena cava. It comes out. There's renal veins, these two veins that come back from the kidneys. It goes down. It also splits, and you have the common iliac, and it turns into the interior iliac and exterior iliac. That turns into the femoral vein and the great saphenous vein, which goes all the way down, the great saphenous vein. And it comes back up, and this is the lesser saphenous vein right here. And that's about it. So that is those are the veins. Let me try to give you a full picture here. Those are the veins of the models. And if you have any questions, if you need me to explain anything further, also watch my other videos. I just do it on paper. I just draw it out on paper so you can see the flow of everything, and that seems to help a lot. So if you watch that first and then you come and watch this model video, it might make more sense to you. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, and don't forget to subscribe.